Hello, welcome to the training webinar for today. I'm Dale Franks. A little bit about the topics and schedule for the webinar. For those of you who didn't know, I had a bit of a medical emergency last week and spent the entire week in the hospital. So in terms of how the schedule for the webinar goes, I've just bumped everything up 1 week. So this week we'll do what we should have done last week and so forth. So last week, we were supposed to talk about system administration. We didn't do that, but we're going to talk about it this week. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get into it. Assuming I remember how to do all of this, there we go. We are shared. We are good to go, it looks like. Now, usually in the system administration training webinar, what I talk about is the stuff inside IT admin, and we are going to talk about that. But I thought that this time, as we talk about it, it might be good to talk about sort of general system configuration as well, whenever you are first setting up your system or whenever you are modifying your system to make it more useful to you as an administrator and more useful to you as a user. One of the important things, I think, is getting the system set up for you as an administrator is to go in and modify the workspace for the IT admin workspace, or I think it's the admin profile workspace, actually. And that's the workspace that we're looking at here. This is my home page. Now, for most of you, whenever you first install Process Director, what your homepage looks like is this. And this is the old content list, the one that used to be the standard display in Process Director, with the folder list on the left and the content list on the right. And well, actually not the content list, but the folder contents on the right. And this was what we used to call the content list. This is less useful now with version 6.1 because the content list is always accessible anywhere from inside Process Director. You can always have access to the content list and you can always navigate. So what I've done in my admin profile is I have changed my homepage and I've just set my homepage to IT admin. And this is the homepage of the IT admin section. There are, of course, the buttons to the 4 IT admin sections that are set up here and the corresponding links down here on the page. So this becomes my homepage. The other thing that I do inside the admin profile, and it's not part of the default, is I also add the data flow analyzer to the navigation links in the navigation bar for the workspace. I find the data flow analyzer is extremely useful. Not quite as useful as it used to be because now, whenever you, certainly with a SQL business value, you can actually run a test and grab the first 100 rows back from a business value, which is really useful in context of running the business value. Still, if you're running any sort of database-based custom tasks, or you have some set form data, even those that are pulling business values, and you want to see exactly what is going on in the background of your system in terms of the data that you're pulling, having the data flow analyzer available to you is super convenient. So it's great to have it just as part of your homepage inside your IT admin. I keep calling it IT admin. It's the admin profile workspace. So I would make those little changes right off the bat. If you're on 6.1, it's really easy to do. In the configuration area, you can go into the admin profile workspace, and on your top navigation buttons, your homepage button, I have it set just to home. And what I've done, because it's now set to just home and it's set to home page, although I guess you can't. Oh, there you go, right there, home page. It's set to home page in the drop down. I do need to set the home page. So admin profile is already set to a single window. So what I've done is I've set that single window to IT admin. And that just sets my homepage as the IT admin homepage. And I think that's a much more convenient way of having it set up. Now, in the top navigation buttons, there's some things that you're not going to need anymore. Uh, for example, there's no need to have an IT admin button. Even though I'm showing this button, it doesn't appear, notice up here, on the admin profile navigation bar. No reason to. I've already got it set as my home page. So because I have IT admin already set, this button, this IT admin button, it simply doesn't appear up here anymore. Also, metadata admin does not appear on the toolbar anymore, largely because it is now in the settings menu. So anything that is in the settings menu just automatically gets removed from the navigation button toolbar at the top of the workspace. So as you can see, this is my old workspace. I kept it in here for demonstration purposes, just to kind of show you how the new UI will work in 6.1. So it doesn't appear. The log off button also does not appear. Don't need it. Log off button appears, well, we call it log out, but the log out button appears in your user profile menu. So again, it's part of the standard UI for everybody. So therefore, it's simply not going to appear as one of the navigation buttons. Now, of course, what does not appear in the settings or user profile menu is the data flow analyzer. So this does work, and this does give me access to the data flow analyzer. I have an entire webinar that covers the data flow analyzer. We don't talk about it much, but as I said, it's really useful whenever you begin running forms or running custom tasks that touch external data. Being able to go to the data flow analyzer allows you to trace what you have done. Now, I haven't done anything and I haven't searched for any data, so it's not actually tracing what I'm doing, but it builds this tree from right here at the top, traces and partition, and it allows you to go down the tree and see all of the data calls that you've made, pull them up, and look at a sample of the data. I think it's the first 10 rows of the data that got pulled back by your custom task or, excuse me, or whatever it is that's making any sort of data call. And so it traces you through this partition. I just find it really useful to have running all the time, or at least to be able to access all the time. Of course, most of what I do on a day-to-day basis, and probably most of what you do, should be via business values, since business values now pull back the first 100 rows as a test. The data flow analyzer, or DFA, is not quite as useful, but if you're still running a bunch of old legacy custom tasks and things like that, being able to go to the data flow analyzer is very useful. For these menu items that already appear in either the settings or the user profile menu, you can simply delete them from the admin profile. You don't really need them. Like I said, I have kept them simply to show you how the new UI works. So if this was an older system, then all of these items would be showing up as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'd have 6 different buttons showing up here on my admin profile menu. As you can see now, I only have 3. This gives me obviously space for extra buttons. And that's primarily what our thought process was whenever we were determining what would go on the navigation toolbar and removing stuff that already appears in the UI menus, simply to give you extra horizontal space to add additional buttons. For the admin profile, it's probably not something that you're going to fill up all the way over here. There's just a limit to how many admin items I suppose you would want to have access to. Although, if you have a processes in error knowledge view, that would be something that would be useful to add here. Now that you have the space to do that, you can do that. Any other sort of management knowledge views that you create on the system, you can add it to this admin toolbar. So for a new installation of Process Director, or even if you're just upgrading to 6.1, might be a good idea to go into your admin profile and make some changes. Some other things you need to think about are permissions. Let's take a look at the content list. Now, this system is only used by me, so I'm the only one who really cares about it. But you should care about the permissions that you set for your end users on a production system. On a staging system, on a dev system, you can kind of cowboy your way through permissions, but on a production system, you really can't. And one of the things that you might find useful to do is to go into the default partition, just go to the root of the default partition and go to its permissions tab and begin setting up your permissions. Now, in my case, as you can see, this is set up for all authenticated users. I'm mainly the only one, so giving full permissions to all authenticated users allows me to use this as a great demo system. On a production system, this would be an extraordinarily bad idea. So for your all authenticated users, you'd probably want something a lot more restrictive. My suggestion would be that you give all authenticated users run permission as an absolute minimum, because if you don't, nobody's going to be able to submit forms. In most cases, you're also going to want to present your users with some knowledge views, and those knowledge views will often return form instances, or generally for end users, will almost always return form instances. With this permission setup, none of those knowledge views will work. You really do need, if you want to show anybody anything in a knowledge view, you're really going to need to turn on view children as well, so that whenever those users run a knowledge view, they can actually open up and view the objects that have already been, in most cases, either in progress or that have already been completed. So if I want to go back and look at my previous submissions of a particular type of form, let's say I've made, vacation requests, and I want to go and check my past vacation requests. You as an administrator or implementer are going to provide that via a knowledge view, so I can go back and look at my vacation requests and open up those old vacation requests. But without view children permission, my knowledge view isn't going to show me anything, because I'm not allowed to view any form instances because I have no view children permissions. So this is probably what you want to do. And then you're going to want to replicate those permissions to, all child objects if it's an existing system. That way you can ensure that people can see the permissions. It does get a little complicated on a production system because there are probably some folders where you have special knowledge views for managers or for people in a specific group. So you really do have to be careful about replicating current permissions like that, because you'll overwrite those existing permissions if you already have a permission set up that has some more open permissions for some user groups. So if you've got an existing system, you got to be super careful about this replicating current permissions. But moving on, those are the two best permissions. A couple of weeks ago, got a couple of different tech support requests from people who said, look, I've created a knowledge view and users have permission to see the knowledge view, but it's not showing them anything. And the first question that comes to my mind is, okay, well, on those form instances you're trying to show, for the form definition, do you have view children permission for that form definition? And everybody's like, oh no, we only give run permission. Okay, well, that's fine. That's valid, but you're now stopping all of your knowledge use from working. So just as a permissions thing on a production system, you pretty much need to give run and view children permission. Obviously, the other permissions, view, modify, and delete, you would never give that to your user community on a production system, because you don't want them to view anything in the content list, and you certainly don't want them to modify or delete anything in it. And in most cases, you don't want to turn on modify children and never turn on delete children. In Process Director, the way permissions work is if I'm assigned a task, I'm going to get all the permissions I need to complete that task. And I'm going to fall into a group when I'm assigned a task called process users, that group right there. Process users get some special permissions, one of which is modify children permission. You get it automatically once you become a member of process users. That's a dynamic group, and if I'm assigned a task, I'm a member of that group. If I'm not assigned a task, I'm not a member of that group for that task, and so therefore I revert back to just being able to view children and run. But when I have a task assigned, I do get modify children automatically just by virtue of being a task participant. So I can add information to a form, I can edit existing information, whatever I need to do, and then complete my task on that form by clicking one of the task completion buttons. So because those permissions are dynamically assigned, I don't have to give them explicitly to all users. So there's very little reason in most cases to give the average end user modify permission. If they need that permission, they'll get it when they get assigned a task. Otherwise, run and view children is the way that I would have my system set up. I should point out that in the documentation, there are some extra things. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these things for step-by-step purposes, but I am going to show you where they are in the documentation. So in system administration, and I believe it's in common admin actions, there is a topic called securing process director. You need to read through that topic about some various settings that you can configure in Process Director to improve the security on your production system. A couple of important things, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, such as the existence of web services and whether you want them enabled or not, how you want your audit log files to work, which we'll talk about a bit later. Changing the password strength of your user passwords. For those of you who actually use built-in users, I know most of you use SAML, which means it's handled outside of Process Director. So there's some different settings here that you can work with. There's also some discussion of setting up some of the different subroutines in the custom variables file about how you'd like forgotten passwords or password validation or what to do when a user logs in, or indeed whether a user can log in or not. You can have all of these things set up there. So this securing process director topic is very useful. Obviously, everything here is optional, and you can make these settings to improve your security as seems prudent to you, but you should know it exists, and we have this fairly long topic about all of the things that you can do for improving security. Many of the things in this topic we'll be talking about today as we go through the IT admin area. So let's go back home and let's take a look at the IT admin area itself. The IT admin area divided into 4 different sections, all of which do different things. And normally we would start here in configuration, but we're not going to do that. We're actually going to go to user administration, and we're going to look at a user account. Let me pull up Diana here. Now, these 4 sections in IT admin are accessible, and indeed the IT admin area itself is accessible only to system administrators or partial administrators. So to give someone access to all or a part of the IT admin area, you do need to edit their user account. On a production system, as an administrator, you should have 2 accounts. The first account should just be your regular end user account, the account that you would use to access Process Director on a day-to-day basis, where you put in your vacation request or you submit a complaint or whatever else it is that you do as a normal end user. With that user identity, you should have no elevated privileges. You shouldn't be able to do anything special. For the purpose of day-to-day access in Process Director, You should just be a normal user, do your SAML log in like everybody else does. You get to see what everybody else sees. You get access to the portions of the UI that are relevant to you, and you work as an end user. What you will need on the production system is a built-in account, which you're going to have to create on the system manually to give yourself administrative access. Normally, when you install an initial process director installation, there is an administrator account that is built in, and that will be the account into which you initially log in and serve as a system administrator. And the first thing you would do is you would build on the production system, you would build your administrative account. Now, on a staging or development system, if you want to give your normal user login full administrative privileges, go ahead and knock yourself out. That's not a problem. You can do that. It's not a production system. Probably very few users log on to it other than you and your implementers anyway. That's perfectly fine. But on a production system, we want to be able to track some things, especially via auditing, a lot more closely. So best practice is to go in and create your own administrator account. Let me be clear. Every administrator needs their own built-in user account. You should not share a single administrator account with multiple users. For auditing purposes, if someone goes in and deletes something off the content list, for example, I need to know exactly who did that as a system administrator. If I have 5 different people sharing the same system administrator account, I can't do that because everybody's logging into the same account, and I'll ask all 5 of my people who might log into that account who deleted this, and I may or may not get an answer, and I have no way of investigating further. By ensuring that each individual administrator has their own built-in administrator account, then I can ensure that if somebody goes in, logs in as administrator and makes a change, I pretty much know who did it. And so whenever you have these built-in accounts and you're creating them as administrators, you would create them normally as a system administrator. And when you select system administrator, and let me unselect all of these different admin buttons here. Normally, when you set someone as a system administrator, it just checks all of the buttons. Well, I think I might have to update it here to get it to do that. But there we go. Now that I've updated it, I'm not only a system administrator, but it automatically checked system user admin, system install admin, troubleshooting admin, metadata admin, and system configuration admin. That's great. That's what a system administrator is. System administrator has complete control. You can, of course, just give people access to a specific portion of the IT admin interface. You can give them access to one or more portions of the interface simply by making them a system configuration admin or a system troubleshooting admin, which would obviously give them access to troubleshooting. An installation admin gives them access to installation settings. User admin gives them access to the setting we're looking at, the section we're looking at now, user administration. So you can give full or partial admin ability to different users. Irrespective of whether you give them full or partial system admin access, you are going to want to ensure that each of those accounts are a built-in account, that when they do their regular login, they log into a regular end user account. You only want to log into your administrative account on a production system whenever you are performing actual administrative actions. You shouldn't be going in as an administrator and doing non-administrator things on a day-to-day basis. There are a couple of other things that affect different areas of the system that you can also give to users. There is user impersonation ability. Now, this is independent. You can turn it on or off. So a system administrator may or may not have user impersonation ability. In the troubleshooting section, as we'll see in a little bit, there is an impersonate page. And indeed, if you have user impersonation ability, in the drop-down menu for your user profile, you also have the impersonate user menu item, which will take you in, allow you to impersonate a user, and the system will show you everything that that user sees. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but you have to actually grant that, and it is granted independently of whether you're a system admin or not. Similarly, whether you can access metadata admin, so you can see metadata administration here, I can access it because I have been given the ability to be a metadata admin on this system. Once again, metadata admin, just like user impersonation, is separate from system administrator ability on the system. Finally, you have a partition admin. And partition admin, and I know I just saw it here, right there, system partition admin. This is a special kind of admin authority that you can grant to a user. And what it does is for every partition to which they're a member, and I understand most of you only have one partition, so it would only affect a single partition. But if you turn this on, it doesn't actually grant the user access to anything in IT admin. They can't perform any top-level administrative actions. What they can do, however, is do anything that they want in the content list. Making someone a system partition admin gives them full control over every object in the content list for every partition to which they're a member. It doesn't matter what permissions you have set on your system in the content list. It ignores all object permissions, and it will allow the user who is granted system partition admin ability to go into the content list of that partition and add, edit, or delete any item that exists in the content list. This is often useful for systems where you have a small set of administrators and perhaps a larger set of implementers. And if you want your implementers to go in and change things, and again, on a production system, this would be a very rare use case. But if you want your partition admins, or you want some of your implementers to be able to go in and change things, you can give them system partition admin authority. Is this a good idea on a production system? Probably not, but on a development system, it's a great idea, because what it enables you to do is to not allow any of your implementers to access anything in IT admin, but still be able to have full control over the content list. So they could go in and create new objects, and they could edit them and delete them as is necessary, and do anything that they need to do to create their applications on your development system. Would you want to give those same people system partition admin on a production system? A lot iffier on that. Probably not, but on a development or a staging system, this might be a great idea, because what it allows you to do is sort of bifurcate out the ability to be a system administrator and administer the IT admin area and make changes to the installation settings, from just being able to go into the content list and make changes there. So you have different levels of administrators or admin access to a system. All of those different levels of access to go in and make changes to the system are granted on a per user basis in their user account profile. So once you are a system administrator and you have access to the entire panoply of sections in system admin, then you can begin going through and making your administrative changes as desired. So now that we've done that, we can go home. As we saw, there are three sections. We're going to start off with the configuration section, and there are just a couple of things that you can do in this section. The first and the home page for this section, and the one that you're going to be accessing most often, is the workspaces page of configuration. And this is where you create and edit all of your workspaces. We just did a couple of weeks ago workspaces and dashboards, so we're obviously not going to get into the business of learning how to create workspaces here, but this is where all of your workspaces are created, edited, and organized. Second thing you can do in configuration are your partitions, and set up partitions on the system. Now, even though it doesn't look like it, if I was to look at my content list, because in my content list, all I see is default partition. That's because even though I have multiple partitions on the system, in my primary account, I've only granted myself access to a single partition, the default partition. Many of these other partitions I use for various testing things and training things. For example, I have a partition here called training courses, where it's basically an empty partition, and the only thing it contains is content for the Process Director training courses that we provide on Reach 360. Got to be careful with partitions, because partitions don't talk to each other. And so if I create multiple partitions, I can't share data between those partitions. Indeed, I can't even share metadata between two partitions on the same system. So it does create what is, in essence, a kind of a separate Process Director system that is firewalled off from other partitions. Now, if I open a partition, so let's open up default. The only thing I can really do to edit a partition is to assign users or assign groups. In most cases, you want to assign groups to partitions. So by virtue of group membership, I can either access a partition or not. And the partitions that I am assigned to will determine what I see in my content list. In fact, let me go ahead and give myself access to the training courses permissions here. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and assign myself. This is not usually what you would do. As an administrator, you really don't want to get into the business, either for permissions or access or anything else. You really want to stay out of the business of assigning individual users to anything. I'm kind of curious as to why my name isn't appearing here, because I should think that I would be visible, and I am not for some reason, and I don't know why. Because I wanted to add myself to this partition. So Diana is added to this partition. So let's do something. Let's turn my content list on, and let me go over here and let me impersonate Diana real quick. And this should show me what Diana sees. And when I go into Diana's content list, I not only have access to the default partition, but I also have access to the training courses partition as well. So as Diana, I have access to two separate partitions on the system. Obviously, as a system administrator, I can impersonate Diana and I can get her same level of access, even though in my normal user account, I would not have access to the training courses partition. At the moment, it doesn't look like there's anything in training courses, but the partition exists. Diana is a member of it, and thus Diana can see that partition in her content list. I should warn you, though, that even if you are a member of two partitions, that doesn't mean that I can do something in partition A and see it reflected in partition B. Partitions are firewalled off from each other. You might even think of them as sort of two separate installations of Process Director that just happen to share an administrative interface at the very top level. So if I have a second partition and I want to call, say, custom tasks from that partition, well, I can certainly do that, but I have to have custom tasks. And I don't know if I have, no, I don't have anything here. I don't have custom tasks. So if I wanted to run a custom task in this partition, I couldn't, because I don't have the custom task folder in this partition. They do exist up here in default. There they are, custom tasks, but they don't exist down here in training courses. So for all of these things like, data sources and the template library, custom tasks, custom utilities, if I create a new partition, I have to import all of these objects into this partition, in this case, training courses, to make any of that work, because partitions are firewalled off from each other. That's important to remember. You can have multiple partitions on your system. It is more of an administrative burden, because each partition now has to be administered separately. By the way, this is one of the reasons why we have partition admins, because you're going to have somebody who's a partition admin on each partition to be able to go in and ensure that each partition has the custom tasks and custom utilities and have the same data sources and all of the other shared objects that you have on the other partition that you want to be able to replicate in a new partition. When you create a partition, you're essentially creating sort of de novo a new mini installation of Process Director that is going to need to be configured from scratch, or at least the content list portion of it is going to need to be configured from scratch. Now, everything else in IT admin works in both partitions. So for example, if I have a user like Diana, I can assign Diana to two separate partitions, because all of my top level administrative items, with the exception of metadata, are universal. So anything that I set up for installation settings or in troubleshooting or user administration, that's applicable to all partitions. But from the metadata all the way down through the lowest part of the content list, they're completely separate from each other. Do you need multiple partitions on your system? In most cases, for most customers, the answer to that question is no, you do not. In most cases, you can control access to different areas of the same partition simply by implementing an appropriate permissions methodology at the folder levels in your content list. And so if you want a section of your content list that only HR can access, then you can create an HR group, and the people in that group are the only people who would be able to view or access or run even items that are in that section or that folder of your Process Director installation. So for the most part, you can control access to different portions of your Process Director installation simply by using permissions appropriately. There are some cases where you might need permissions. For example, if you are a parent company and you have two subsidiaries who are kind of independent, but you want to manage the processes of both of those subsidiaries at the enterprise level, then I might have a permission for company, or a partition for company one and a partition for company two, and manage them both separately. And indeed, they might even have, well, they'd certainly have different partition administrators and whatnot to be able to go in and make changes to those portions of the content list. And the two partitions, as I said, since they never would talk to each other, can really function independently. So that's a good use case for having multiple partitions. On a development system, you might, in fact, have multiple partitions. Indeed, some of you have three systems. You have a development system, a staging system, and then a production system. That's great. That's the ideal environment for developing applications, testing them, and eventually promoting them into production. Some of you, however, only have two systems. You have a development partition, or I'm sorry, you have a staging system or a development partition or a development system. In a case like that, you might find it useful to create two partitions on your development system, one for staging and one for development. So all of your implementers would have access to the development partition and they could do anything that they wanted. Then whenever you had just built an application and you wanted to put it out there for beta testing and you want to set up a testing program, you can move that over into a staging partition and have all of your end users who you want to use for testing, give them access to that staging partition, obviously with reduced permissions, so that they would only have basically run and view children permissions on that partition, but they could just go in like a normal user. They could do the application testing on that staging partition. And so rather than having three separate systems for doing that, you might be able to squeak by with two systems, with a development system that has two partitions on it, one for actual development and monkeying around with and banging on with a hammer, and then a staging partition where what you might do is only throw things on that staging partition that are in current testing, so that nobody really has access to anything other than whatever applications you happen to be currently testing with your end user community. So that's a second reason where you might have multiple partitions, in that case on a development system. Outside of that, the reasoning for having separate partitions seems to be a pretty high bar to cover to make second partitions on a production system, largely because you've kind of doubled the administrative burden because you have to administer each partition. That means if, let's say, we download or we provide a new download for custom tasks. Okay, well, now there's two places that you have to import it instead of one place. So having partitions makes your job as an administrator, everything that you need to do becomes just a little bit harder because you have to duplicate a lot of effort between multiple partitions. Is there a limit to how many partitions you can have? No, you can have as many as you want. This is an excessive number of partitions, I will admit. But I do a lot of weird, freaky testing stuff here, so sometimes I throw on extra partitions just to bifurcate it off from the rest of the system. Whatever you want to do, feel free to do. The recommendation is that unless you have a really compelling reason, on a production system, you don't really need multiple partitions. But again, I'm not your supervisor, so do what you want. Global knowledge use. Look, but don't touch. The task list, the content list, the forms I can submit, the running processes, knowledge views, all of those are global knowledge views. Now, if you want to create some new global knowledge views, go ahead. There's no problem with creating new global knowledge views. If you go in and you touch any of these knowledge views, you are changing the system for every single user. And we have had customers that have gone into global knowledge views and said, hey, I want to change this task list so that it only shows this, so it only shows the user stuff from a particular process. That's a super bad idea, because now you've ensured that you have ensured the task list works for only that process for every single user on your system. Don't delete or edit any of the global knowledge views. There's one exception to this rule. If you open it up and you go to the options, if you want to go down here and get rid of the old sort of ugly mid 2000s UI and go to the Process Director 6 UI, feel free to go in, check this checkbox, do nothing else, immediately hit OK, and save your global knowledge view. That you can do. Now, for newer installs, this is checked automatically, I believe, or at least it should be. If you have an existing installation and you install 6.1.x, this will not be checked by default. It will remain unchecked. So what you will see is the version 5 UI in all of your global knowledge views. So if you want to update them so that they have the more modern, flat look and feel, it's perfectly okay to come in, check that box, and save your global knowledge view. Other than that, you don't want to mess around here. Now, if you want to create new global knowledge views, you can. But remember, these are global. These are supposed to be reusable over the entire system for all users. So let's go back to my example of a task list for a specific process. You wouldn't want to make a global knowledge view that does that. There's no reason to do that. That is a normal content list to knowledge view. You can create custom task lists in the content list. And once you've created a custom task list knowledge view, you can display it in a workspace or dashboard. So if I have a workspace for a specific application or set of applications, and I only want to show a subset of all of the tasks for a user that are only relevant to that specific application or small set of applications, you can certainly do that. The place to do that is in the content list. You can make content list knowledge views that are task list knowledge views all day long. Knock yourself out. Make as many as you want. In the global knowledge views, you're really only making knowledge views that are universally applicable to anyone, anywhere on the system. So these tend to be unfiltered, very big knowledge views that do big things. I don't have an example of one because, quite honestly, other than this one down here called test that doesn't actually do anything, I just don't create global knowledge views. Now, I can see some reason for why you might want to in certain special cases, but I can't really think of a good use case for doing it. However, that capability is open to you. I'm not going to tell you never to use it, although I will tell you that touching any of these 5 existing global knowledge views, editing that is an extraordinarily bad idea, and you will weep tears of bitter regret if you go in here and edit these knowledge views, other than to turn on the V6 UI. Other than that, this is not something you want to mess with. The object permissions report is just what it says. It's just a report. What it enables you to do is just to search a partition level, just to look at all the objects on that partition. As you can see, there's one object on this partition, and it shows you what the actual object partition or object permissions are for all of the objects on that specific partition. At the very top, there's a number of search functions, or search filters rather, that you can use. So if we go, say, the default partition, and I search the default partition, I probably shouldn't have because I have a lot in that default partition. So we're going to get a big honking list of permissions down here at the very bottom for many, many different objects, all of which are, of course, largely the same because I have the same permissions all over this system. But I can see all of the objects on my system. I can go into, a specific folder, for example. So here we'll go to the training webinar folder and we'll do another search. That should give me a much smaller group of search results. Well, I say that, but that may be the biggest selection of items on the system. It doesn't matter. I can use these filters to narrow down the objects that I want, the type of objects. For example, if I just want forms or timelines or whatever, or just data sources. Do I even have any data sources in the training webinar partition? I'm sorry, the training webinar folder. I'm sure that I do. Probably not a huge number, but maybe a larger number than I thought, because I do have a lot of examples in there. But anyway, this just allows me to find all of my objects and see what those object permissions are. As an administrator, it's pretty useful to just go through and check to be sure that you've got permissions set on on the proper folders or the proper objects in a specific folder. This report also has one link, one action link: export permission data to CSV. So while I can see it here on the screen, as you can see, it's relatively inconvenient because I've only got 7 rows of data that I can see at any given time. If I really want to give this any extra study, being able to export it to CSV, opening the CSV file in Excel makes my life a little bit easier in terms of being able to go through and analyze what my different object permissions are on all of the different objects. In my case, I know what the permissions are because they're pretty much universal on my system. So now let's move back into user administration, and it's still trying to return something, which I don't want it to do. So guess what? We're going to reload and go direct to user administration. The homepage of user administration takes me to my users, and this is where I administer my user accounts. This gets us into a complex area. Now, on my system, as you can see, under user type for each of these users, these are all built-in users. So each of these users have been created basically manually here on this particular server. Most of you are not going to operate in that environment. Most of you are going to do one of two things. You're either going to have a SAML login system, some sort of federated identity system, where your SAML users are going to be created off of your identity provider in SAML out of your LDAP directory, and as users log into SAML and they go to Process Director, Process Director is just going to take the SAML assertions from your IDP and are going to create those accounts automatically. So under user type, instead of built-in, what you'll see is SAML. Alternatively, your user accounts will be provisioned from your Active Directory system, whether it's your local Active Directory system or whether it is the cloud version in Azure. It doesn't matter. Those are all considered Windows users. And so every time that you perform a synchronization with Active Directory, it's going to go through, take a look at your Active Directory users and groups, and it's just going to synchronize the Windows users in Process Director with users in Active Directory. Both SAML and Active Directory are easier methods of managing users, especially if you have a large user community versus creating accounts manually via built-in accounts. You could certainly do that, but it would be a super pain to have to manage those users. The nice thing about Active Directory especially is if you disable a user in Active Directory or pull them out of a group membership or whatever else it may be, or you just delete them from Active Directory. By the way, that's probably not a great idea. Whenever the next Active Directory synchronization occurs, those accounts will be disabled in Process Director. That'll just happen automatically whenever your Active Directory synchronization occurs. And so that allows you to do all of your user management. Well, as an administrator, that allows you to not do user management. All of your user management is done by your IT department inside Active Directory. All you have to be concerned about as an administrator is that your normal recurringly scheduled Active Directory synchronization occurs, and then all of your users just get updated automatically. SAML works similarly, although it's not really an Active Directory sync. You can do an LDAP directory sync for the LDAP library that runs your SAML system, and you can basically do the same thing for your user accounts. In both cases, the way that this works is not tricky exactly, but it does raise some issues that you need to think about as an administrator. Now, again, I don't want to look at a client system that uses any Active Directory users. Maybe, and I haven't checked, maybe I should have. I'm going to go look at our demo system. Now, I don't know that on our demo system we have any Windows users on that system either. So this may be a waste of everybody's time, but I at least want to go in and check real quick. I'm going to user administration, and I just want to check my users to see if I have any Windows users on this system. I may or may not. I don't know. Built in, built in, built in, built in. Okay, so these are all built-in users too. All right, so not particularly helpful. So let's just go in and look at a regular account. I want to turn your attention to the very bottom of the page and this text area here. If you're running Active Directory or LDAP sync at all, then there are two items here that are going to be super important. First is the external GUID. This is the ID that you have been assigned in either the LDAP or Active Directory system. For convenience's sake, I'm just going to say Active Directory from now on. Just keep in mind that it means LDAP too. So in Active Directory, you have an ID called the SID in Active Directory. When you run an Active Directory synchronization and a new user account is created, it's going to put these two pieces of data in here. First, it's going to put in the external GUID. That's your SID in Active Directory. And then it's going to put the sync profile that created the account, which will on its own have a GUID in process director. And those two GUIDs have to match. So it gets a little tricky. Let's say that I have two, and we'll talk about directory synchronization here in a minute. If I have two AD syncs running, and both of them contain a user with the same SID, I sure wish that this didn't pop up in Edge. This is just worse than being stabbed. Don't help. Can you just please not help me? Just let me highlight stuff. So if it's the same user, and this same user is in two AD sync profiles, okay, the SID for that user is going to be the same, but the sync profile won't. What that means is, as far as process director is concerned, those are two entirely different users. So you got to be real careful about setting up your built-in users so that each sync profile brings in a different group of users. If you have two sync profiles and they both bring in the same users, then you're going to have duplicate accounts in Process Director for what is essentially the same user, but they've been brought in by two different AD sync profiles. Similarly, if in your directory synchronization, and this goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. Remember I said, don't delete users from AD. It may not be a great idea. Well, here's why. So I have an employee. They worked for us. They were in Active Directory. Let's say their SID was 1. I'm going to make this easy. So user 1 in Active Directory worked for a couple of years, then got a new job, left the company, and went somewhere else. So I say, okay, well, fine, he's gone. I'm not just going to disable him in AD. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that user account. So a year later, you rehire the same person. He comes in, he's the same person, he has a history with your organization, but you're going to create a new account for him now in Active Directory. And now let's say his SID is 2. When you resync that user, let's not get all excited that he's going to have access to all of his old history in Process Director. He's not. It's the same person, but he has a different SID. So even if I bring him in with the same sync profile, Process Director thinks he's a completely separate user because his SID was 1 in the sync profile. Now it's 2 in the sync profile, which means as far as Process Director is concerned, that's a completely different user. So just keep in mind that you have to match both the external GUID and the sync profile, and they have to be exactly the same for the same user to be considered the same identity in Process Director. Everything else in the user profile is pretty straightforward. You can lock their accounts. You can force them to change their password. For those of you who have the mobile app component, you can make them a user of the mobile app. You can make them an administrator of the mobile app. And then, of course, there's all the administrative configurations at the bottom of the screen. You can set everybody's time zone and locale. There's only one locale on the system, which is US English. You can upload a picture image or signature image for each user. If a user goes on vacation, you can go in and do task delegation. All of those user administration stuff are done for each individual user profile. At the user management level, you've got 2 things you can do. You can export users and you can import users. In most cases in Process Director, whenever you export an item, it gets exported as XML. Users don't. Users get exported and imported as Excel. So whenever you do a user export or import, that's always in Excel format. If you just want to see what the Excel format looks like, you can just grab a couple of users and you can click Export Users. And I don't know if this is going to give me just those 3 users or if it's going to give me the whole thing, but let's save this Excel file to my downloads folder. And we can just open her up in Excel. And there we go. Those are the 3 users that I checked. And let's make this a little bit bigger. Not that big. Why is it working so slow? That's weird. So as you can see, these are the standard items that get exported for the user. So I have their name, their username, their email address, the groups that they're members of. Now the groups, these are only members of one. Well, no, here's a member of multiple groups. Great. So if you're a member of multiple groups, it gets exported as a comma separated list in the groups column. All of the text properties that you have, their phone, their title, their supervisor, and all of that stuff, that gets exported as well as whether they're, day pass users or mobile app users, or whether or not they get to see the content list. All of that stuff gets exported. So you could technically go in here, make changes to these users, and then just re-import them simply by clicking the Import Users link here, and you could just re-import those users. This is the primary way of importing users. And in fact, I know that some of you who are on SAML systems, rather than doing an LDAP synchronization because your LDAP is servers behind a firewall, that what you do is you export the Excel file out of LDAP and then just do a regular Excel import into Process Director of all of your users. So you kind of do a sort of a quasi synchronization, which means that you could change their group memberships in the Excel file, or you could set them as an admin, or you can change their email addresses, whatever you need to do, enable them, disable them, and then just re-import them back into the system. In addition to that, there's a couple of custom tasks to provision new users or to edit existing users that you can actually create a process using a custom task and a form or process timeline, and you can actually create new users on your system or edit existing users on your system. That's available to you as well. But in general, you can just do an export or import. The import does not have to contain all users. So, if I just wanted to import just the users that were in that Excel file, since I didn't make any changes to it, I could just do that, re-import those users. And well, as you can see there, I didn't make any changes. So nothing has changed in the import report. But the only thing that gets changed are those users that are part of the Excel file. So I can export users, make changes. I can export a single user, make that change, and then re-import that single user, or I can export a bunch of users, disable them all, re-import them. So it does enable you to sort of manage via Excel, importing and exporting all at one time. And this is all done at the user section. Groups work similarly to users. Again, if your groups are being sourced from Active Directory, the group type will all be Windows rather than built in, or if you're coming in from SAML, they'll be SAML groups. And they'll just synchronize automatically. You can, of course, create built-in groups. Anytime you create a group, you obviously have to assign users to that group. This is the only place really in Process Director where you are going to manage users at the user level. Obviously, if you're doing a directory synchronization, those group memberships are managed in AD, so you don't have to do anything in Process Director. But in this case, since it is a built-in group, and by the way, these are the different types of group: LDAP, external, SAML, Windows, and built-in. Those are the primary group types. So if I have a built-in group, this is where I'm actually going to go in and assign individual users to that group. Once I've assigned individual users to that group, as a best practice, as a system administrator, I really want to do permission assignments and other things via the group itself, not via individual users. To the extent that I have to manage individual users, and I do have to manage them somewhere, it's best to manage them at the group level. Because if I have this group, which is, I guess, ASGT Business Services, so I can assign this group as a task assignee. I can assign permissions, folder permissions to this group, and I can do that everywhere in the system. If I want to go in here and add somebody else to this group, so if I want to go in here and say, okay, well, fine, great, Diana and Eric need to be part of this group as well. This is the only place I have to manage it. Because now that they're part of this group, by hitting OK here, all of those other assignments elsewhere in the system just get updated automatically. If you try to assign, whether it's task assignments or permissions or what have you, to individual users, well, if I want to add 2 users, I'm going to have to comb through my content list. And I'm going to have to go and add individual users to permissions and folders. You really don't want to be in that business. And the more people that you're managing in your system, the less you want to be in that business. So management at the group level, that's where we manage individual users. To the extent possible, everywhere else in Process Director, you want to use these groups as the basis for permissions or task assignments or whatever. Now, for task assignments, there's obviously an exception to that, which is the use of business rules, because there are some things where groups are not a great task assignment method, but they're not specific enough. So you have to use business rules. So that exception aside, everywhere in Process Director where you assign anything, you really want to assign it at the group level. That way, if I do need to make a change, I only have to go to one place in the entire system, and that is the group, and make that change. Moreover, if my groups are administered in Active Directory, then I don't have to go in here and make these changes at all, because that should already be done for me by my IT people as they update the AD sync. Authentication settings. This is where we determine how people access the system. Again, for most of you, this is going to be utterly irrelevant because you're already using either SAML or Windows SSO or something like that. Certainly on the cloud system, SAML is by far the most common authentication method. If you're an on-premise customer, which I recognize that the vast majority of you are not, then this might become relevant because you have the ability to turn on Windows SSO and enable Windows authentication. The way this works is you simply don't log into Process Director. You log into Windows, and if you open up Process Director, just like it does for SAML in the cloud, is just going to accept the HTTP header assertions that your identity is valid that come from Windows, and it's just going to let you into the system. And indeed, if you have Windows authentication turned on, you can just automatically add Windows users if you want. So if their account doesn't exist on Process Director the first time they open it, then Process Director will just take their Windows login identity and just whip up a quick Windows account for them and just create it in Process Director, and then they'll just always log into that account. There are a couple of other authentication methods. For example, you have HTTP header authentication. If you set this, you would have to figure out what the different headers are, what the header variable is that passes the user GUID, the user ID, their username, their email, their groups. This is not used widely anymore, but it certainly exists there. And you can also authenticate external users. You can turn on external authentication. So again, if you wanted some users to log in via SAML, you could set that up with an external authentication system. For most of you, you're on the cloud. You'll never look at this. It simply won't be relevant to you. Most of you will be on SAML. For you on-premise customers, if you want to use some alternative login methods other than creating built-in accounts and just having them log in directly on the homepage, which I think for most on-premise systems is how you do it, either that or by Windows authentication directly, so that you just use Windows SSO. If you want to do that, this is where you'd set up specifically Windows SSO. The delegation page is where you turn on and off delegations. Now, in the best of all possible worlds, anytime somebody is going to go on vacation, assuming I'm set up for it, and I think I am, they're going to go into their user profile and they are going to delegate their own tasks. And so all they have to do is pick the user to whom they want to delegate their tasks, click Delegate User, and then they can go off on vacation, and all of the tasks that get assigned to them will just be sent directly to their delegate. And that's great. That's wonderful. And half of the people are going to forget to turn that delegation on when they leave, or turn it off when they get back. Turning it off when they get back, not as big a problem. Turning it on when they leave, however, kind of is. So you're probably going to need to go in occasionally to the delegation page, and you're going to need to create some user delegations. It's real simple. You pick the user from whom you want to delegate, the user to whom their tasks need to be delegated, and you can create the delegation. It also shows you a list of current delegations on the system. For example, Carl is currently delegating all of their tasks to Diana. So I have an active delegation on the system. So of course, depending on how many people you have on your system and how many you're delegating at any given time, this list is going to be, much longer than my list. You can always just remove a delegation simply by clicking the X button. Super simple to do. And this is normal delegation, and this is the majority of your delegations. There's also something called shared delegation. Shared delegation is a lot more complex. Not gonna, certainly don't have the time to get into the details of how shared delegation works. But in general, it's largely used for C-suite people who have assistants who handle their sort of day-to-day tasks in Process Director. And you can specify a particular assistants who will share those delegations with you. You'll still get assigned a task. However, you can designate other people who can go in and complete those tasks on your behalf. So you can still complete them. So unlike standard delegation, where you just never see the task, it just automatically goes to your delegate. In shared delegation, you still receive the task. You just have proxies who can complete the task for you. And you can specify who those proxies are here simply by enabling that shared delegation. So in this example, Eric has set Barb and Rick as his designated shared delegates. Shared delegation also requires that you check a property in the Advanced Options tab of the activity itself to turn on shared delegation for that specific activity. Standard delegation does everything. Everything gets delegated, and everything gets delegated to who you specify. Shared delegation is applied per activity. And so if an activity doesn't have shared delegation enabled for that activity, shared delegation won't work. You get assigned a task, you have to complete that task. Your proxies, whoever they may be, your assistants, never see it. So shared delegation is a lot more complex. It's also a lot more restricted in its general use. Like I said, it's generally restricted to use at the C-suite level because generally only senior managers need to have that level of shared delegation. But you manage that here, and you can enable shared delegation from one user to whoever their proxy or proxies may happen to be. And you can also, as with standard delegation, turn it off here. We've talked a lot about user directory synchronization without actually looking at any user directory synchronization. There are two primary types: LDAP synchronization, which is sort of your generic LDAP server. And then there is, of course, Microsoft's specific flavor of LDAP, which is called Active Directory. And because it's Microsoft and they're special and standards don't apply to them, we have to do things in a slightly different way. So LDAP is the standards compliant method of synchronization. Active Directory is the Microsoft specific method. Active Directory, of course, is most common since most people are on Windows networks, and it's pretty easy to set up. You just have to create an Active Directory sync profile. The Active Directory sync profile, at minimum, is going to need a couple of things. It's going to need the Active Directory domain that you're going to synchronize, which means it needs to contain the full domain, even down to the OUs that are in Active Directory. If you don't know what an OU is, don't worry, neither do I. It's just part of the domain. I see it all the time. I'm not an Active Directory guy, so I don't really know how Active Directory works other than at a very high level. So I need that full domain and every OU in that domain that I want to synchronize. I need the AD username and password that enables access to that Active Directory domain or domains so that it can pull the values. And of course, I need the Active Directory root path. All of the other stuff are data that might be stored in Active Directory that I want to transfer over into the user account in Process Director. Obviously, some stuff will come over automatically. The SID, the username, their name, their email, that comes over automatically. There are all these other fields, however, that exist in the user account And you may have that data stored in Active Directory as well, and you can bring that data over. For example, if you have someone supervisor in Active Directory, you can actually bring their supervisor over, or I believe it's their manager. You can bring their manager over, and it will just automatically in Process Director hook their manager up with each individual user. You can sync users and user group memberships and just groups. This is the default users and user group memberships because it brings in both users, groups, and group memberships. That's generally the way that you do it. You certainly could sync each of these separately. I have no idea why you would, but you could do it. You can also limit users to specific groups. You can limit, if you have hierarchical groups, so you have a group and then it has subgroups, you can limit to a group and only pull in that group and its subgroups. You can add objects to partitions. So you can actually add, users to a specific partition in an AD sync. So technically I could have an AD sync for each partition. It would bring all of my groups into Process Director. They'd all be accessible via user administration, but they would both be members of different partitions when I brought them in. One thing that's important whenever you're first setting up Active Directory and you're bringing in this groups is the interactively run this sync profile. And I can't run it because I don't have anything set up. I don't have an AD domain set up or a root path set up. So I can't actually run it. Be careful when you use this button, because when you click it, it's going to give you some extra stuff that you can see and you can run the sync profile, but it's not going to run it for real. By default, when you manually run a sync profile, it's always going to run it in test mode, which means as you watch this page, because what's going to happen at the bottom of this page is that all of the synchronization activities are going to be printed to this page, and you're going to see them at the bottom of the page. Basically, it's going to generate an AD synchronization log, and it's going to look like everything is running properly. And you're going to sit here for an hour and watch it run, and you're going to think this is going to be so great. And then you're going to go back to user admin, and the only users on your system are still going to be administrator, user 1, and user 2. And you're going to wonder, why didn't it work? Well, there is a checkbox, and it's hidden down here, and you only see it after you click interactively run this sync profile, which automatically runs in test mode. You need to uncheck that so that it actually runs, not that it runs in test mode. Because when it runs in test mode, Process Director is going to do everything that you would expect a synchronization to do, except actually create the user account. It's going to skip that one bit. And so it's going to look like everything is happening, but everything is not happening. LDAP synchronization, very similar. I have an LDAP sample here. Obviously, you're going to pull it from an LDAP URL, but you're still going to need the username, password. Any group or user filters that you have need to be applied. Other than that, pretty much everything is very similar in terms of synchronizing users and groups and group memberships and synchronizing in partitions. It's all going to work exactly the same way. So that's user directory synchronization. And this is where you create either your LDAP or AD sync profiles. There is is there? Not sure what happened there. Why isn't user perms working on this system? Okay, there's some little exception. As always, I'm on a super cutting edge version of Process Director. Let's go back to demo. Let's just run it from there. Demo should work, right? I didn't want to go to metadata administration. Wanted to go to user administration. Okay, that's what I expected to see is that for user perms. This is just a list of user permissions on the system. Again, searchable at the very top. It shows you all of your users. It shows you what permissions they have on the system. Once again, it is exportable to CSV as well. I don't like being on the demo system. I like being on my system. So we're gonna backtrack back over here. User references. I'm not sure I have anything running that's assigned to a user. And how did my username become BPL support? Huh. Okay. Something is, I've done something bad. I've just realized. I just saw my name and the username was BPL support. I've I've messed up something that I need to fix. Sorry, that just got me all hoodwinked now. So here's the BPL support user on the system, and it shows you every place where it is used. It's not used much, but it does have workspace and partition memberships. You can search every user on the system and find all of their references. Yeah, it has me as BPL support. Not sure why. Um, Now, as you can see, for me, even though it still says BPL support, it's not, it's me. As you can see, I am mentioned all over the place in a whole bunch of forms and a whole bunch of process timelines. I'm in a whole bunch of permissions records. So I can see, everything about where I am in the system and what I have permissions to. It's pretty useful as an administrator just to be able to find a user and to see exactly what it is they can touch to determine whether or not they should be touching it. Installation settings section. We've certainly made some changes here. In fact, I said this was a cutting edge version. This is not a cutting edge version, I don't think. I think, in fact, this is this is 6.1.200. Okay. I understand things now. So I do want to notice that we have made some changes in 6.1. I think I talked about this in the Spotlight webinar, where the usernames need to be manually modified. I'm not sure how that got changed to BPL support, but if I want to modify it, I have to do it manually here with the modify. Well, I have to save it too, don't I? So at some point, BPL support got stuck in there, probably while I was demoing it. There, now I'm Dale Franks again. Okay, I'm happy. But just as this happens here, if we go to the installation settings page, same thing down here. This is a LastPass problem. LastPass wants to stick usernames and passwords in there because, once again, it wants to help you. My motto, don't help. Let me do stuff. And it's caused some problems. So there are some new settings inside the UI where these fields are simply disabled until you manually click the button and enable them. Because after a while, we got tired of people's LastPasses changing their mail user ID and password to the one from the one that they had configured to the one that they had saved in LastPass. So some of these fields have to be manually edited. Installation settings is where we have pretty much the primary settings for our server. The two most important of which are this page, properties and global variables. Properties is where we set up what the name of our server is and its interface URL. You really do want to be sure the interface URL is set properly on your server. If you're in a cloud installation, it's already set properly. If you're on premise, it may or may not be. So you will want to go in and ensure your user interface URL is set properly. Primarily because there are a lot of, sort of automated URL generation methods that go on in the product. And if this is not set properly, it could point people to the wrong URL or to an incomplete URL. I will please tell you to notice that there is a slash at the end of the interface URL. You want to be sure that you keep that. Removing that slash could cause problems. There's actually a system variable called interface URL that enables you to pull this so that you can create URLs on the fly with the interface URL as the base URL. So it's an important property. If you have a proxy that gets access to Process Director, and again, we're probably now talking about on-premise customers, not cloud customers, you would need to set up the proxy server that you use. In Process Director, you can choose to store documents on the file system. By default, all document attachments are stored in the Process Director database as binary files. That obviously, if you have a lot of attachments, takes up a lot of space. So you have some options for storing it on a cloud system. So in this case, or both on a cloud or on an on-premise system. On an on-premise system, obviously you'd need to pick an accessible folder somewhere in your file system. On a cloud system, we generally set this up for you. As you can see, this is a cloud system. So I have this set up in Azure to go to a file path on Azure. And in my case, it stores everything. There's this document size for file storage. It's set to 0, which means that all of the document attachments that I upload on the system are not stored in the Process Director database. They're just automatically stored in the file system. We do have a new feature here to move documents to the file system after n number of days. However, this is really designed for files that have a file size, so that it will store them in the database for n number of days, and then if they're over a certain size, it moves them over to the file system. With this setup that I have here, I've got share documents to file system or store documents set to true. Got my document storage path, and I'm saying, okay, we're setting this to 0 bytes. This is just automatically going to store everything on the file system. So this particular property is irrelevant to my setup because everything is already being stored on the file system. This is largely for large files like video files or stuff, or I want to keep them local, perhaps for quicker access for n number of days, and then I want them moved over into the file system after that time. So I can just specify the number of days. But as I said, since this is set to 0, everything is automatically going to the file system anyway. So it makes this essentially non-functional with the configuration that I have. Every system obviously has a local IP address. If you have load balancing set up, you've got some load balance URLs. Registered email is important because it is the final fallback email for from addresses. When you're creating applications in Process Director and you're sending out email notifications, there are a couple of from addresses that get used. This happens to be the last one in the hierarchy of from email addresses, which is your sort of basically overall registered email address. Normally, and we have to go to the global variables page to see this, normally, this property right here, the workflow from email address, specifies the default from email address for every process task notification that gets sent by the system. So this is our default. Now, this can be overwritten. In each individual email template on the email data control, you can also specify a from email address there. And if you do, then that is the from email address that will be used for that specific notification, and it will skip this notification. But if I don't have a workflow from email address, and I haven't specified a from email address in the email data control of an email template, then my final fallback is the registered email address here. I don't have a BP Logix company ID. Most of you, however, do. If you're on premise, this will not be filled out. So you may want to contact your BP Logix account rep and have that set. And the reason that you might want to have that set is because it may be helpful during tech support tickets if you just want to send us your logs via email and have them attach automatically to the ticket. Got to know your BP Logix company ID. For most of you on cloud, I think we've already got this set for you, so you don't have to worry about it. Logging level. By default, set your logging level to 0. The higher you set your logging level, the more verbose your logs are going to be. Now, logs work, as we'll talk about in, I really need to be moving along faster, as we'll talk about in a minute, hopefully. The way that logs work is that they're just text files. And once they reach a certain file size, your current log, your main log, so your internal log, i.log, it gets saved as i.bk1. Actually, we do it the reverse. The backup log that is known as i.bk9 gets deleted. i.bk8 gets renamed as bk9, bk7 gets renamed as bk8, all the way back up until i.bk1 gets renamed to i.bk2. Then i.log gets renamed to i.bk1, and then a new i.log file, text file, is created. This is solely dependent on the size of the text file. So once the text file hits the size limit, and I don't remember what the size limit is on it right off the top of my head, but it is not based on time or anything else. It's solely based on file size. So that means if you are logging at level 5 and you are logging, 5K's worth of text logs per minute, then that first log is going to last about 10 minutes. And then it's going to go to backup 9. So basically, at the end of the day, what you're probably going to end up with is an hour to 90 minutes of backup logs to determine what happened. And if something happened yesterday, you're not going to have logs that go back that far because your logs only go back 90 minutes. So your normal logging level should be set to 0. Occasionally, in tech support, we'll say set your logging level to 2, maybe even 3. That's temporary. Once we say, okay, we found the problem in the more verbose logs, we'll tell you, please reset your logging level back to 0. 99% of the time, everything you need to know, you can find out in logging level 0 without having to try to store, 50 megabytes per log every 5 minutes, which means that your logs only go back a minute and a half. Set your logging level to 0. If you have a custom CSS file, you can set it up here. Basically, these are all of your normal settings in Process Director, how you're going to send email, all of your SMTP settings, all of that stuff is set up here. Most of these properties, I think, are self-explanatory. And I'd explain them, and I can't explain them more because it's 11:38. Global variables. These are just sort of global settings for your system. Really, the only thing you really need to go in there is set your global workflow from email address for the most part. Keeping everything else set to their default settings is going to be just great for you, and you're never going to have to go here unless you change your workflow from email address. But this is the one thing that you really do need to have set up so that you ensure that you have a valid email address for all emails sent by all of your process notifications. A couple of things you don't have to care about on a day-to-day basis are your database settings. This is the connection settings to the Process Director database in the back end that runs your entire system. Obviously, when you first install, this is important because you have to hook it up to a SQL Server database. Other than that, once it's set, this is one of those set it and forget it kind of things. If you want to know what licenses you have in Process Director, because occasionally people will put in a support ticket that says, hey, am I allowed to do this or that on my system? Honestly, in tech support, I don't know. I don't know what your license says you can and can't do. You know who knows? You do, because you have a licensing page so that you can go in and see exactly what your server is licensed for, the type of license type that you have, what your license key is, and all of that. That's all on the licensing page. So if you want to know what it is that your system is allowed to do, open your licensing page. It'll tell you. Troubleshooting section. Server control. This is basically a set of links that allow you to perform sort of routine, mundane maintenance tasks. So let's say you want to update your system, you can turn quiesce mode on, and that will stop end users from getting into your system and making changes when you're trying to update it. If you're on a development system and you have something that has a time-based constraint, the way timers work on the system is timers don't get checked until timer checks run, right? There's no, ticking stopwatch a la 60 minutes that is counting down elapsed time anywhere. Timer checks have to run. And on a, development system, timer checks probably only run every 20, 30 minutes. And so if you want to, ensure that a timer check runs, you can just pop the timers by clicking run timers and, forcing the timer checks to run. So basically you can write some diagnostics to logs, a couple of little things that you can do. These are just sort of general settings or general maintenance links that you can click to do general maintenance-y things. However, this is not the entire universe that exists. You can turn debug mode on. And when you turn debug mode on, you see more stuff. So there are some things that are kind of hidden in debug mode because we don't want you to accidentally click them, but you can turn debug mode on and get access to some additional features on that page. System information page, some general information about your system, database size, how many users you have, licensing, system resources that are available to you. So it just gives you some general system information. Live stats, not sure it's going to work on this system, although I have the UI. This is a new feature, haven't talked about it yet, something that the engineering team is working on to throw in some live performance statistics on the server. It's not working now. I'm sure that almost none of you have this, I think, at this point, but that's just a coming thing. And basically it's just scrolling through some live statistics. You can read it. Tells you how things are going. Not much else you can do with it. This is the impersonate page. In fact, we've already looked here. We've already impersonated Diana. This is where you go to impersonate someone. You can give people in their user account impersonate permission. You should be aware, though, that if you don't have system administrator permissions, you can't impersonate a system administrator. You can only impersonate the full permissions of someone who has your same permission level or below in terms of administrative permissions. As we saw previously, if I don't have access to a partition, but I impersonate a user that does, then I get to go in and see that permission as that user. While permission is turned on, Process Director will treat you as if you were the other user, but it knows you're not, and anything that you do on the system will be logged as having been done by you while impersonating another user. So system knows that you're using impersonation. And if you do anything, it's going to log it as you being the one that does it. Audit logs will not work for most of you because by default, it's turned off. There is an audit log in logs, but again, it's a text file and it gets replaced routinely as the size increases. And log files, audit logs especially, get replaced super quick because it's logging everything that is happening on the system by any user. So all of these user activities all get logged. So if you have 1,000 users and they're all doing this stuff, that audit log is going to get big quick, which means that the replacement cycle is going to go through really quickly. So my audit logs may only go back an hour, 5 hours, a day. I don't know. Depends on, again, how active your system is. That's not optimal. So there is a custom variable that you can use to save the audit logs to the process directory database. And you can save those logs for as long as you would like. So you can save them for 30 days or 15 days, however long you think is great. And it's obviously going to be a big table. It's going to have a lot of logging information. But the nice thing is it's searchable. I don't have logging turned on this system. It's unnecessary to do for me. But for you, this is great because what it enables you to do is to search for a user or an object or a particular type of action that a user might have done, and inside a particular date range, and then to run a search. As long as audit logging is turned on via the custom variables, and I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but they are shown, I believe, well, they're certainly in the documentation. So F audit log, I know that that's how the system variable starts. So there's my auditing custom variables. So it's this one, F audit log file only. That's the important one. By default, it is set to true on your system, which means that I'm only going to store log files in the text file that you see on the logs page. My suggestion, you can go with this or not. Again, I'm not your supervisor. My suggestion is that you set this to false and that you set your in audit log days to some reasonable value. 10, 15, give yourself the ability to go back, a week or two if you need to do some sort of forensic examination of the log files to find out that something has gone wonky somewhere, somebody has done something that you don't want them to. Again, this is all getting saved in SQL Server. So do you really care how big this log file gets? Considering that table form data may have millions and millions of rows? Probably not. But on the other hand, there's no reason to have these log files sticking around for 6 months either. I think probably, 15 to maybe a max of 30 days is a reasonable amount to store these log files. By default, if you turn off faudit log file only, the default is 7 days. So by default, we'll keep the last week of audit log files. It's just a way more convenient way of searching for and finding data in the audit logs really quickly. Trying to search through the text audit logs are, a super big pain. So I don't recommend it. Unlike any of the other of these sort of reports that exist in IT admin, you can export this to CSV as well. And you can do whatever data mining you think you might want to do in Excel after you export it. Your logs page itself is where all of your logs are. You have several different types of logs. You have script logs. Script logs basically do what they imply. They take care of all of your scripting, which also includes a lot of your SQL calls. I'm pretty sure there's none here in this particular, but I mean, here's where a REST service got filled. System variables were invalidated. I clearly have an invalid resource string somewhere that needs to be fixed. This is your script log. Basically, this tells you if things have gone wrong with your script. If you're running any custom scripting and there's some sort of error in your scripts, this is where you would find it. We're going to save the primary one for last. Email logs, by the way. So we're going to go through from sort of least important to most important. Email logs are where all of your email messages that are sent by the system, this is where they're all logged. So you can always go into your email logs to see what messages got sent and to see whether those messages were successful. All it does is store email attempts. That's it. So anything else that's wrong with your system, it's not going to help you with, but it does at least let you go in and find a specific email to see whether it got sent or not. The init logs are fairly unimportant and not super useful in most cases. It's just basically the main system object initializations on your system. We find it useful on the engineering side for troubleshooting problems that you might have. You probably aren't going to find it super useful on your system. Audit logs, these are the text versions of the audit logs. And as you can see on my system, 1150, what's the earliest that this goes back to? It goes back to 1014. So I'm the only person on this system. And I'm the only person who's been using it for the last 2 hours. And I have less than 2 hours of audit logs for just solely my activity on this system. Actually, 1014, it goes back an hour and a half. So this is everything that has been going on that I have done either manually or in the background while we've been in this webinar. Audit logs fill up fast. Imagine how fast this would fill up if there was somebody other than me using it. Oh, wait a second. 9/20/24. Oh, okay. Sorry. I was just looking at the time. I guess looking at the dates is important. So this goes back to 9/09. Okay. So I was thinking that is a lot of stuff, but this is just me on this system. It goes back to 9/20 on just this log. Okay, great. That makes a lot more sense. Forgive me. I was just looking at the time and not looking at this. So just for today, 10:03, this is everything we've done since the webinar started. So you can see all the pages that I've accessed, whether I've been doing stuff as, as administrator, running logs and all that. This is all of my audit logs. So it's a record of everything that I've done. The super important one, of course, is the internal log. This is the log that logs everything that's happening on the system. Again, standard logging level 0. We may ask you to temporarily bump this up to 2 or 3 and do something and then see what the log says or export the logs and send them to us. But that's generally something we'll only do on a temporary basis. In general, when you're looking for what's happening on your system, it's the internal log that you want to go to. Well, sometimes in tech support ask you to send us the logs. You can always click download logs as zip. It will take and zip up all of your log files, the backup files, your system settings, your custom VARs file. It'll all zip that up into a big package and we'll export it as a zip file. You can then take that zip file and attach it to the ticket. There is an alternative of emailing logs to support. It actually sends it to tech support at bplogix.com. We have to have your company ID, your support ticket number for this to work. If you don't know these things, you should know your ticket number, but if you don't know your company ID, it's also going to take a while because it has to go to our mail server at techsupport.bplogix.com. Import has to run that goes out and grabs stuff out of that server, then has to be imported, has to find it, has to attach it to the regular ticket. The quickest thing is to download the logs as zip and then just attach the zip file to your ticket. One other thing here that is kind of cool for the logs is your ability to insert text markers. So I do this a lot when I'm doing troubleshooting and I want to see what's going on. Is I'll just throw in this long line here and I will insert this marker into the log file. And we'll refresh and I should be able to see it. There we go. Right here. I threw this marker in as a log marker. And so now I can just look at this and it tells me where I need to start looking for my troubleshooting. So something is going wrong. Don't exactly know what it is. So what I'll do is I'll go to my logs page. I'll insert a marker. Then I'll go back and try to replicate the problem. And this tells me where to start looking in the logs, in the internal logs, to see what my problem might be. Run email tests, a real simple page. All it does is send an email. It can send an email in one of 3 different ways. Primarily, you want to use your process director configured settings because you're testing whether your system is sending email properly. So you go in here, you just create a from and a to email address, and you click send. If it says success at the top, once you click send, then it tells you my system is sending email. If I'm not receiving emails, there's a problem somewhere, but Process Director is sending emails. So this is where you go to test to be sure your system is sending emails. You have the local IIS SMTP server for most of you who are cloud customers. That's not going to do anything for you. On-premise customers who have a local IIS SMTP server set up, you can test that. And then if you have a new server that you want to use just to do a little testing on, you can certainly do that. You can use specific SMTP server. And of course, depending on the type of server, you'd have to go in and do all of the server configuration and then just send a test message. For the most part, well, when you call us and say, hey, somebody didn't receive an email, the first thing, certainly in tech support, that I will ask you is go to run email tests, send a test message. Was it successful? If you get the success message at the top, then it was. If you don't, all right, well, that's useful information too. It'll show an error message at the top. In fact, I think that'll get to me. Here, run send. And there we go. Succeeded. That tells me that my email is working, or at least it tells me that Process Director transmitted an email message to the mail server and did not receive a failure response from the mail server. So what this means is that Process Director is successfully talking to the mail server. Is the mail server messed up? I don't know. Am I on some ban list somewhere? I don't know. But what I do know is that this means Process Director is sending mail to the mail server successfully. There's only one more thing left, and that is the help button, and it doesn't do much. All it does is open up the Process Director documentation website. So it's not even something that happens inside Process Director. It just opens up the documentation. In any event, that is system administration for Process Director, along with some best practices that I was able to throw in here and there. I hope you have a great week, and I hope to see you again next week. Until then, so long.